Okay. Okay. Thank you all for coming back. I love the engagement that's going on, and do know, that if you want to talk further during a session, you can go into the Granite room. There's a live stream there, and you can talk or be out on the patio. As an educator, I always try to create the optimal learning environment. We checked on the heat to see not the conversation as far as the heat, but the room temperature. If we can just kind of bring that down a little, because we have a lot of 98.6s in this room. And also the lighting is really important, and the sound. But also, we don't want distractions if we can help it. So I appreciate you being here and your attention. And now, one of my favorite guys, Steve Clyde, is going to pick up on his question back in 2016, when he wrote his white paper, Water Rights for Great Salt Lake. Is it the impossible dream? And I asked Steve to, okay, it's been a while, you're on. So would you please welcome Steve Clyde?
Got to get organized. Well, I do not have slides or a PowerPoint. And the reason I don't is PowerPoint reminds me far too much of a horse I used to own. And he could tell when people were afraid of him and would just act horribly. And PowerPoint tends to treat me that same way. And so I'd rather just talk to you and keep your attention that way. I figured you can read things if you want to read them. So hopefully that will be all right. As Lynn indicated, I kind of on a whim, back in 2016, I had told the people that organized CLEs for the bar that I was through. I had spoken at about 28 or 29 of them at that time. I really was kind of getting tired of it, figured there were a lot of youngsters out there who might want a chance. And so, thanks guys, but I'll pass. About a week later, they called me back and said, we got an interesting topic you might want to think about. And that's, can we get water to Great Salt Lake? And that kind of piqued my attention and kind of dragged me back into that routine. The product was this paper that Lynn's just alluded to. And I want to read just the brief part of the abstract. It says, Great Salt Lake has many things. It's a terminal lake. It's an environmental jewel, providing habitat to migrating birds, significant wetlands, nature's best filter for preserving water quality. It supports significant economic activity. It provides various recreational opportunities and is a contributor to the poor respiratory health when lake levels are low. Although basin-wide upstream diversions, our water supply, at least in 2016, was remaining about the same, but upstream diversions and continued use had drastically declined the quantity of water reaching the lake. And that is creating the problems. We've grown too big. We've got too many people. We're forecasting a doubling of our population. Water supply is already strained, and I'm not entirely sure how we continue to sustain that growth while we try and protect Great Salt Lake and also deal with the Colorado River issues, which are serious and ever-pressing They're not quite as prescient as the Great Salt Lake is to this group, but statewide it's huge because much of the Colorado River water we import into the basin is our domestic water supply. And so those are issues we've got to work our way through. I'm kind of a poster child, I guess, when it comes to Great Salt Lake issues, in that I have been an athlete all my life. I have biked, rode bikes, mountain bikes, skied, played tennis, golf, ridden horses forever in the mountains, and I can't do any of that anymore because I have emphysema. And I have never smoked. I have never had any genetic predisposition in my family going back generations. And the only thing my doctors have concluded is that this is environmentally caused from living and playing and being active in Salt Lake's filthy air my whole life. And a lot of that, I think, has to be attributed to the lake. And so Dr. Perry's work on dust on the lake, I think, is fascinating, something we need to worry about, and something we got to fix. The focus of this paper back in 2016 was what can we do, if anything, to kind of help get water to the lake. And I started looking, said, well, we've got obvious things like the public trust doctrine that would be absolutely catastrophic. We've got the public welfare aspect of Utah law that would give the state engineer some authority to approve water rights that are perceived to be more in the public welfare than others. But we didn't really have any great tools. And so I started looking throughout the West, because the forced extraction of water from people really doesn't make any sense. Condemnation, while it's available and it results in compensation for the taking of the asset, the cost of that would break the state. I say that because I recently helped a client sell some water rights in the Park City area. He had 1 acre-foot of water with an 1860 priority, sold it for $85,000 for that acre-foot. Now, assuming that is somewhat representative of the market, and we need 800,000 acre-feet a year for the lake, that's a cost we simply can't afford. And so the whole thrust of this 2016 paper was, how do we find voluntary market-based transactions that will give people a reasonable inducement to come forward to sell their water or lease their water, but on a temporary basis and on market rates rather than forced. And in fact, the legislature has embraced that by outlawing eminent domain as a means of acquiring water rights for Great Salt Lake. And so we are in this mindset where it is voluntary market-based transactions, and those are the key. Well, what have we got? The recommendations I found were really interesting. We had water banking from Idaho dating clear back to the 30s. We have split season leases in Oregon, which were a fascinating tool in my opinion. It allows a sequential use of water. Farmer during the early stages of the irrigation season, when they can maximize their water use and crop production, use it the latter part of the season, rather than keep trying to eke out a crop, sell that water, lease it downstream, and do that, and park your tractor, go to Palm Springs, go have fun. And that has some appeal. And we've done a variety of other things in the statutes that we've worked a lot on enhancing in-stream flows, and a lot of the prior speakers have gone into a lot of these, so I'm not going to get overly redundant with it. But we have taken these ideas, they've then found their way into the Governor's Water Strategy Report, really, of 2017. That was authored by 48 people from the whole spectrum of society, water task force members, environmental community, water managers, others. And that laid out a real great groundwork as to how we could go forward and try and protect Utah's water and get more water to the lake, including enhanced in-stream flows. If you may remember, our in-stream flow legislation used to be that I could say, fine, I won't divert water at my point of diversion, but at the end of my property, I lose control because the next guy downstream in priority is going to take that water. The in-stream flow did not work, and it was only for protecting fishery in that little stretch of the stream. So that needed to be modified. And then broader issue is how do we get the water if we save it through in-stream flows and shepherd that down to where it needs to go. That was the biggest hurdle, because under the appropriation doctrine, if I don't use my water, the next guy in priority can. And by doing that, the water does not get to where we want it to go. It simply goes to the next water user. Other tools that were recommended were pooled leasing type arrangements. A lot of our mutual irrigation companies do that today, especially if they happen to have access to storage. The shareholders who are willing will lease a portion of their water rights or make them available. Other shareholders or other parties can then lease that water and make another use of it. And all these combination of things have culminated in almost 100 different bills since 2016. Just constant refinement. Looking at in-stream flows. How do we catalog, how do we really capture the idea of what is saved water? How do we define that? Is a saving of consumptive use? How do we quantify that? Once we do that, how do we move that to the lake? And it's taken a series of years to get that to where it's working. State engineer had to create a whole new system of more or less water right accounting where they could come in and do that. Teresa's staff has done a tremendous job pulling that together. So I think we have made great strides in getting the tools in place. And to me, that was the important aspect of this, is if we finally have the tools in place and the political will, and it seems to me that we now have the political will, legislature is putting the funding together to help move things forward, that we've got a pretty good chance of success here, but it's going to take time. And that's the difficult part. The ag optimization program, for example, I think is going to be great. It's cash incentive to modernize your irrigation equipment, but as someone who has grown up on a farm, you can only work the land in the fall when it's dry. And try and get heavy equipment out there in the spring, you just destroy your property. So it takes time to plan, get funding, to design and engineer and construct, and often that has to happen over the course of several seasons. And so it's not an instantaneous situation. And that too is a problem because people have, well, we've done this, why aren't we seeing results? Well, give it time, folks, we will. And again, by redefining what saved water is, making it possible for water saved through ag optimization to be leased or sold or simply held on to for future use. But we've created the market opportunity where the party who does invest in ag optimization then can get an economic benefit from taking their saved water, selling it or leasing it or doing a variety of things. There's been a tremendous effort at revising administrative practice. It's just been really quite amazing to see the energy and the effort that has gone into all this. The discouraging part, of course, is that if it doesn't snow, it doesn't matter. And yeah, it's great that Trump wants to throw $1 billion at us. We've got places we can spend it, but all the money in the world can only lease paper if there's no water behind it. And so the bigger thing I think we've still got to do as a challenge is work on climate change issues, work on getting out of this horrendous drought cycle we're in if we can. I'm not sure it's something that we can actually control, but I think we've got to try and get there, because that's where we're going to finally get the water back into the system. And once it's there, the tools are now in place to move that water to Great Salt Lake. That, I think, has been a great accomplishment. It's taken a lot of years to get there and a lot of funding. Legislature has thrown a lot of money behind this, which is really fairly impressive. I'm surprised that they got behind it as well as they did. But we still have our naysayers. I represent a big irrigation company up in the Camas Valley, and talking to him about it and saying, yeah, we've got all these options. We could do this. You could save your money and do some of these things. And he says, I could give a rat's ass about Great Salt Lake. I need to feed my cattle. And everybody is still very centric on their own issues. And changing that mentality will take time. I think we need to do further education in our schools and help the younger kids understand the water cycle, understand what it takes to get it there. Because if we don't, I mean, they'll take that home, help educate their parents, cut down on landscaping and do these things. The urban environment is not where the water is being used. Some is, surely. But, we've got, some 91,000 acre feet of treated sewage effluent being discharged to Jordan River every year. Well, that water goes to the lake and is a benefit to the lake. But if we were to reuse that water, that would maybe take development pressure off new water resources for our cities. But it has a corresponding problem of decreasing water supply to the lake. But everything has a response, equal, ag optimization. You get very efficient in your irrigation. One of the consequences is the loss of return flow. How does that hurt? Well, groundwater recharge may not occur. It impacts downstream users who relied on the receipt of return flow for their water. Look at the Sevier River, for example, that is used over and over again and dry dammed. Well, if every upstream water user went to sprinkler systems, Delta would dry up. Those are problems. And so they have to, strike some reasonable balance somewhere. And that's the difficult part of all this. But we're making headway. But there's a good deal of, I almost say, ignorance out there. I had a legislator approach me last year. He said, I just drove past Strawberry Reservoir and Jordanelle Reservoir. We've got all that water sitting there. Why don't we just dump it to the lake? And I said, well, we could. And that would put about 1 million acre feet of water in Great Salt Lake, which will then evaporate away. It's not going to stay there. But that's the drinking water supply for 3.5 million people. Now, does it make sense to do that in these horrible drought cycles we're in without any assurance that that water can be replaced? we've got 3 or 4 years of carryover storage in the Central Utah project system. Most of that water, however, is imported off the Colorado River. It's not naturally tributary to the lake. And so releasing that water, while yes, it helps the lake, it detracts from the ability of our big municipal water suppliers that all buy water from the Central Utah project. And to me, that is a bigger issue. Are we going to find a solution on the Colorado River? Who knows? I can't see really amending the compact while it's a contract. It is possible to amend the contract if parties are willing and Congress and the states would bless it. But people are so locked in their positions. I'm hoping that this mediation approach might buy us 2 or 3 years. Nobody really wants to litigate this. It'd go on for decades. And at the end of the day, probably wouldn't come out with any better outcome than the parties may be able to negotiate. But it takes flexibility. And we're not seeing that in some of the players. And that's, to me, is a disheartening situation. But the fact that that legislator would think that just dumping all that water was going to solve the problem without realizing the consequences of doing that, again, shows we've got a real education gap in the population. Those of us that deal with this all the time understand it, but there are an awful lot of people out there who don't. And how we get that message across is going to be a difficult issue. I'm amazed at how this organization has grown. In 2016, we maybe had 30 or 40 people attend, and we were in the old Fort Douglas Officers Club, and not cramped. Today, I think over 300 people have registered for the conference. Not all here today, but they will be. That's starting to show the realization that this is a big issue and that the public is embracing it, and all that bodes well for the future. Are we going to get there? I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm also a skeptic because after this winter, it's awfully hard to be real enthusiastic and say, oh yeah, we've got the water, just give us another year, it'll come. But the seasons vary, and we'll maybe see something that happens. But so I think, and I really at one time contemplated listing every single bill that has been passed, but there are literally hundreds of them. Some are modifications of just a continuing growing process of evolution of these bills to increase water savings, to make it more palatable, to make it more market-based oriented so that it works and we get incentive out there. And we are getting some water users to participate. You saw the statistics that got posted. That's a pretty good chunk of water that had been dedicated. Forestry Fire and State Lands just bought a couple of 100,000 acre feet of U.S. MAGS water rights out of bankruptcy, $30 million worth. Again, the cost is extreme, but the benefit is there. But to deal with market rates with good water rights that are out in the basin, my Park City example ought to cause you. We don't have enough money in the state to do that. And so we've got to continue to work, I think, on these voluntary market-based incentives. But I think we've made great strides at it. And Hannah talked about the HB 410 bill on water leasing. That, again, was a really good piece of legislation. We've kind of got a uniform policy on this. You get your applications in early enough so that they can be approved and the water can be ready for use come spring. don't wait till you think you may want to do it, because the process, in order to afford due process, requires advertising, protest opportunities, and, you know, the average change application is still 60 to 90 days if they're not protested. This has been pushed, and statute gives the state engineer ability to prioritize these leases and do things so that we can help move water that way. And I think, you know, everything we're doing in this regard is trying to make it easier to get water to the lake. But all we need is snow. But that's about all I have, because a lot of the speakers already went through it, and I don't want to be overly redundant. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Hi, Steve. Thanks a lot. That was great. You cited that $85,000 per acre feet, and if we need 800,000 acre feet to get the lake up to a level, that's something like $86 billion we need.
Yeah, it's in that range.
Yeah, and you say the state can't afford it. Who can afford it?
I don't know. I mean, we could get federal help like we have with reclamation. Private donations, we do have the wealth in the state, whether it's the church or some of the very wealthy families that exist in the state. And a lot of them have already donated money or donated water rights. Remember, maybe 2 years ago at a Stegner conference at the law school, the church announced it was donating 20,000 acre feet of water, and made that announcement and then left. In a question and answer period afterwards, the guy says, well, what possible difference does 20,000 acre feet make? And I said, well, you're right, it's a proverbial drop in the bucket. The lake loses on average 1 million to 3 million acre feet a year. 20,000 acre feet is nothing, but it's the gesture. It's the effort to go forward, to set an example. And it's those kinds of things that I believe will help. And we've got people, again, doing that. Miller family and others have come forward with money. And if the government will come forward, reclamation would not have existed without federal money. There's been a real bias against providing further Western water development in the federal system. Whether or not we can turn that corner, I don't know. But this is a very, very big deal. And I think, you know, saving the lake would be awesome, number one. It would be something that has never happened anywhere in the world. Will it happen overnight? No, because we don't have the water to do that. I'm not even sure we can generate 800,000 acre feet every year to try and get there, because that mostly maintains a status quo level. We need some of these massive snow years to get us above that. So, yeah, we got tough sledding ahead of us, but pure market-driven transactions are not the answer because of the cost, but voluntary market transactions based on a lease cost that a buyer and seller are willing to deal with. That's different than trying to go on the open market, because if I'm selling the water rights off my property, I'm selling the development value of my property. And my ability to take my beautiful irrigated meadows and turn that into a subdivision suddenly becomes nothing but a sagebrush-driven grazing land. Still has value, but nothing like it did. And so if I'm going to sell my water right off of that, I'm going to get paid. And that's the landowner mentality. And so it is a tough proposition, but I'm hopeful we'll get there.
Thanks.
I'll be right here, yeah. We've got a really easy breezy topic. This will be fun. No, wherever you guys want to go. Cool, okay. Well, while these guys are getting situated, thank you, Steve, for teeing us up. I think the idea here, Lynn and I chatted, was just to dig in a little bit deeper, this conversation of, you know, what is possible by 2034 for Great Salt Lake. So, my name is Chandler Rosenberg. I have been working on Great Salt Lake issues since 2021. I originally started in the activist space, and over the years, the more I learned, have moved more towards policy and, you know, really come to understand how hard this work really is. And I think sometimes there's this narrative, I certainly believed it when I was a bit younger, that it's this like us versus them. Oh, the state does not care about the lake. They're not doing anything. And the more I dug in, the more I realized, wow, this is like the most complex thing anyone could really set out to do, and a lot of people are doing amazing work. We just don't understand each other very well, or, you know, it's too much for anyone to wrap their minds around. So hopefully we can dig into some of that here today. Yeah, I don't really think we need much more introduction, but let's start with just, I'll have you guys each introduce yourselves briefly, your relationship to this conversation and to Great Salt Lake.
Good morning. My name is Warren Peterson. Yeah, I went to my doctor yesterday. He says a win-win for your audience. One is you're not contagious. And number two, it's going to take a while for your voice to recover, so don't say much. Yeah, Chandler, I've been involved in Great Salt Lake issues since my father took me out and floated on the lake when I was 5. So it's just been one of those things that stays with you. I'm here on behalf, as a voice of agriculture today. I'm retired from a career in ag law and water law, and also as a manager at one point of ag lands in 32 states and 8 countries. So I have a little perspective on how water management works across the world, and certainly I've been involved in Great Salt Lake issues professionally since 1977. So we're all here. We're all here because we're all in this together.
Okay, so I'm Teresa Wilhelmsen. I serve as the Utah State Engineer and the Director of the Division of Water Rights. I've been working on water rights for about 20 years now. Prior to that, I did work for the Trust Lands Administration and Division of Forestry. And personally, I grew up about 2 miles from the Great Salt Lake in a little neighborhood called Poplar Grove. Not sure if many people know where that is, but so I think, you know, a lot of memories of the Great Salt Lake growing up, but then also just I knew pretty young that I wanted to work on land issues. Became an engineer, and I think I've just really appreciated 35 years of working out in the field, on the land, dealing with land and water issues. And so that's what I believe I bring to the conversation.
All right, thanks. I'm Joel Ferry. I'm the Executive Director. Today, the legislature in its wisdom changed my title to Commissioner. So there's no more executive directors, there's just commissioners in the state of Utah. So now I'm the commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources. I've had the honor to be able to serve in the governor's cabinet as the director for the past 4 years. I'll tell you, my experience has been the dedication and focus that this administration has given to Great Salt Lake and these issues. You heard the governor talk about it. I know some people want more, but it is a significant dedication of time, energy, and focus from the governor's office, and that translates into our office as the Department of Natural Resources. We are discussing this. It is a top focus, top priority, hands down the most important thing that we are working on today. We're dedicating resources, time, we're putting our talents, our energies towards this because there's a lot to learn still. There's a lot that we've done. As Chandler mentioned, once you dig into what we're actually doing, some of this stuff is not, you know, we're not out in the public every day, right, out in the media talking and touting everything that we're doing, but the partnerships that we're making, the efforts that we're doing really does make a difference. And I look forward to the discussion today because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. But my own personal experience is these guys have mentioned what their personal connection is. I grew up in a little farming community up in northern Utah, in Corinne, and I still farm. I was out there last night. I work two jobs. I'm a director here of natural resources, but I'm also a duck farmer, right? I'm a farmer, but I have a lot of wetlands and raise ducks. My family's farm and ranch is the last private land on the Bear River before the Bear River goes into the Great Salt Lake. And so I've seen the changes that have occurred over the last 30 or 40 years. I personally experienced those and have personally been impacted by that. And so I want, dedicate my time and efforts to try to make a difference. So look forward to our discussion today.
Hi, I'm Jody Williams, one of the 3 veteran water lawyers on the panel here today. We graduated within a year of each other at law school, and for 40 plus years we've been working with each other and sometimes opposed to each other throughout the West on water rights issues. All of us serve on the Executive Water Task Force. We were all on the Governor's Water Strategy Advisory Committee, for those of you who remember back to 2017. I also served on the HCR 10 Task Force, preparing the report on declining water in the Great Salt Lake as a representative of the Bear River. By request of the 3 Bear River compact states, that's Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming, and by presidential appointment, I serve as the chair and federal commissioner of the Bear River Commission. I started my water rights career working for, now it's called Pacific Corp or Rocky Mountain Power. And a good portion of my work, all the way back then, was on the Bear River. The intricacies and the politics of the Bear River just took hold of my heart and would not let go of me. Not going to let go ever. I wrote the contracts on which irrigation company water deliveries are made out of Bear Lake, as well as 2 important contracts among the 3 states and Pacific Corp, and also what is known as the Bear Lake Settlement Agreement, which settled litigation with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and recognized environmental interests and and recreation interests in and around Bear Lake. And this body of work now constitutes what we call the law of the Bear River. So I've worked on the Bear River my entire professional life.
I'm once again Steve Clyde, and Jody's correct. We have all been at this a very long time. I think I'm the oldest in terms of practice years. I graduated in 1975 from the U of U Law School, which means I've now practiced water law for over 50 years. Yeah, my wife thinks it's time to hang it up, but I keep finding things like this that intrigue me. One of my earliest memories of Great Salt Lake was being a young kid. We rode the train out to Salt Air, and we're walking through the water in the lake, and my dad looked at me, he said, "Watch out for that German brown." And there aren't fish in the lake. And I looked down, and here's this turd floating through the water. Well, in those days, we dumped raw sewage in the Great Salt Lake. It was the waste pit. Nobody thought it had any value. And obviously today, we've taken on a very different point of view. But that one sits very well in my memory. But I've been, as I say, practicing for 50 some odd years. My primary client most of that time has been the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, developing Utah's share of the Colorado River and importing that water into the Salt Lake Basin to provide M&I water supplies to Salt Lake City, Jordan Valley District, Sandy City, Metropolitan Water District, and multiple individuals. In addition, the district serves water to Summit County and Wasatch County and a little bit south of Utah County. Project should have been finished in 1972. Congress quit funding it. And we have just scraped and done what we can to keep the thing moving forward because the demand was there. We're nearing completion, but it has really been a long haul struggle and kind of been a lifelong passion. My dad was the first, he actually created the district, and as well as the Salt Lake County Water Conservancy District, now Jordan Valley District. And I kind of took over practicing from him on his death in '91. But it's been a great career. Water is fun, but the kind of level of water we work with, whether it's on the Bear River or dealing with these massive public projects that do so much good for the benefit of the public, has really been rewarding. And so it's been a career I've really enjoyed.
Thank you. If you thought 4198 by 2034 was a tall order, these 5 in 60 minutes, we're going to see what we can do. Just so you guys have some, so we'll go till 12, and then we'll have 15 minutes for audience questions. So I would like to start with you, Commissioner Ferry, Agent Ferry, however you like to be called. Really, I think this is a conversation about like how do we bridge our dreams with reality, our current context, where we are. You've certainly been on the ground and in the weeds for a really long time, I think longer than people realize, working for Great Salt Lake. So we'd just love to hear from your perspective. Yeah, like what are the, the progress markers that you're most excited about, especially, within the DNR and the agencies that you oversee. Yeah, what are you proud of? What have we done? I mean, this is a smart crowd, so you don't have to get too into the weeds on stuff, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you on that.
Okay, thank you, Chandler. I guess as I look at this kind of landscape that we're dealing with today, so before I took this position, I was serving in the state legislature and had the opportunity to work on some water legislation, other natural resource issues, but also serving as the chairman of the Water Development Commission. And it helped me kind of grasp onto, I'd grown up on the Bear, I'd grown up, in irrigation and water rights, and in those types of issues I had gone through an adjudication. I can remember as a young, just out of college, working with Teresa as she was working on the Bear River adjudication. And so I had, kind of a personal experience associated with it. But I also recognized that things had been changing, right? Back in the 90s, the Great Salt Lake was in good condition. Early 2000s, and then we started to get into these drought years. And so when I took this position as director, a couple of, kind of big focus items were making sure that we had the proper tools in place so that we, as essentially the administrators, right, whether it's Great Salt Lake or any of these other water bodies in the state of Utah, they're owned by the state, they're managed by the state, they're managed by my office. So how do we administer these in the proper way, addressing the needs to benefit the people of Utah while at the same time recognizing the environmental needs that exist, right? And trying to find the right balance. And that's been a tricky process, but it starts with empowering our people to make good decisions. But ultimately, when you look across the board and when you start to think about the impact that we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, it's actually been pretty significant. And I'll just point out a couple of things that we did just this last year, right? The Division of Water Rights, under the direction of our state engineer Wilhelmsen, Blake Bingham, who's here in the back of the room, came up with our the distribution management plan for the Great Salt Lake, where we actually we now have a process in place where we can track and identify the water, additional water, new water that we are bringing into the Great Salt Lake, whether it's through leases, through dedications, donations, acquisitions, whatever that may be. We didn't have those kind of tools before, right? Great Salt Lake was the end point. So water getting in there was just there. But it wasn't specifically identified. Now it can be. And now we know how much new water, additional water, how much water is getting there that wouldn't be there otherwise. I'll tell you, this is anecdotal, but this year, you're going to see the lowest inflows into Lake Powell in recorded history on the Colorado River. You're going to see levels on Lake Powell, Lake Mead, other areas in the west hitting all-time record lows, right? Great Salt Lake, we're going to be teasing that record low, but we're most likely not going to be hitting it. And why? Right? It should be hitting record lows this year, but we're not going to, and it's partly because the efforts that we've been making. Yeah, this is a huge, huge, huge undertaking. As Steve mentioned, the evaporation alone on Great Salt Lake. When I go to other states, I go and I've been to Mona Lake and Walker Lake and Owen Lake and these other lakes, and we talk about the massive scale of impact that we have to overcome. They're in the tens of thousands of acre feet that they need to bring into their reservoirs, their lakes, their systems. We're in the millions of acre feet. And the size and scope and scale and the massive undertaking that we are taking on is absolutely daunting, but it's a task we're willing to take on. I mean, what other governor has said we are going to take on a massive project like this that has so much chance for failure because it's such a great undertaking? Governor Cox is willing to do that. I mean, I know that there's a lot of people like, oh, we need to do more, we need to do more. We are literally we are putting funding, we are doing everything we can as an executive branch to address these issues associated with Great Salt Lake. And so this year, because of those efforts, most likely we're not going to hit record lows, while every other water body is going to, right? And I think we need to look at that as a success. We're starting to move, we're starting to make a difference. Look at the detail. Again, look at how much water we're bringing into the lake. Now, we're not just doing stuff in water rights. Water resources, the Great Salt Lake Basin Integrated Plan. The state water plan is going to be coming out later this year, right? Division of Forestry, Fire State Lands. We just stepped out, I mean, we literally stepped out on the edge with the help of private entities like Great Salt Lake Rising and purchased Compass, not Compass, sorry, Joe, it wasn't Compass, U.S. Magnesium. I get that wrong all the time. And I saw Joe in the audience here. U.S. Magnesium. And we did that because there are certain specific interests that we care about. Right? We didn't have to. The easy thing to do would just be like, well, go through bankruptcy, you guys reorganize, we'll just keep dealing with you and we'll fight and whatever, right? We're not taking the easy road, guys. We're doing the hard things. And so we need all of your support and we can get there together. And there's a whole bunch of other examples. I've already taken up too much time. I know we only have an hour. So I'm going to be done, but we're firing on all cylinders. We're doing everything we can to make a difference, and it all comes from the support from the people, but from the top down as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Ferry. Teresa, would love to hear from you how Great Salt Lake has changed. Joel talked about the distribution management plan, but just how Great Salt Lake has altered the thinking and your approach at the state engineer's office. You guys are really like at the head gate level we talked about, like so, detailed, but would love to, just hear from you how far we've come and what's changed and what you're thinking about as relates to Great Salt Lake.
Sure. So as I kind of think about the paper that Steve did 10 years ago, it's shocking, it's been 10 years. But kind of just as I grew up in, and I say I grew up, in the Division of Water Rights, and there were a lot of papers his dad wrote that were kind of some foundational theories that you saw the water community kind of move toward. And I think a similar thing happened when Steve did that paper in 2016. As kind of an engineer, a staff engineer, I believe I was in the Utah Lake office at the time as the regional engineer. And it just started changing some of the thinking within the division from where we were in, appropriating water and developing that water to, hey, wait a minute, there's other things we need to look at. A lot has been talked about the changes in water law. I think it's one of the benefits of water law is that flexibility to adapt to what are the needs, the current needs or the upcoming needs that are happening. And, our agency has had, over the last 10 years, Steve mentions hundreds of changes to water law that have occurred. And for us, we get to implement those. Some of the biggest things that I've seen appear, there are water measurements under water rights that for decades we simply could not afford the infrastructure to get the measurements and get those put in place. We now have measurements and telemetry on some of these systems that we literally talked about for a couple decades. How do we get measurement on that? So when we talk about shepherding that water to where it needs to get, whether it's a demand management program in the Colorado River or dedicated water on the Great Salt Lake, we finally have some funding that is enabling us to do this. And one of the important reasons for doing that is not only just the benefit of the lake or the Colorado River, but it's helping these folks that are leasing the water or that downstream water right owner see and understand that that water that's flowing past their head gate is colored in a different manner, that we have a change application that allows us to shepherd it past them. And the technology that we're developing with the distribution accounting tool, we also have another, it's called a general apportionment solver, that is going to bring transparency to these water deliveries and actually water right records in general. The general apportionment solver identifies by priority date where those waters are. We've built it out in the Colorado River Basin, and I'm going to be starting some meetings with some of the users in the basin to roll out this tool. And many of you in the Great Salt Lake Basin, we did get funding. I think someone earlier asked, is there someone who's tracking how water moves through these canals and systems? Well, that's our water right network that is identifying that. And we're working in the Great Salt Lake Basin now, and we identify what water rights are where, at what points, and how we're measuring those. And maybe I'll just touch on just a couple other things. In-stream flow has been talked about, the modernization of that. One thing that I don't believe has been mentioned is it was also added into statute, and I think this was Representative Ferry at the time, that use on sovereign lands is a beneficial use. And so it's not just an in-stream flow, but we also now have on sovereign lands as a beneficial use. And lastly, the biggest thing that I'm challenged with right now, trying to focus on, is processing times of applications. It takes months for us to do this. And some of the challenges, and I think we had a governor signing the other day, and we were in front of this huge crowd. And one of his comments to one of the representatives was, yeah, water rights takes a while to get those approvals or rejections through. And it just really hit me that, how is that on the radar of the governor? And if it's on his radar, it's on everybody's radar. And we really need to work at that. Looking at it, the division, the staffing that we have dedicated to processing applications, we receive funding for other parts of our division, but we haven't received additional funding in that portion of our division since the 90s. And so we're constantly trying to keep up with the ever-increasing applications that are coming in. So that's where I'll end. Chandler?
Amazing, thank you. Thank you for your work. Okay, Warren, I don't know what's been talked about today that you haven't had some hand in. I know you've been really involved in this. But yeah, especially with the excuse me, agricultural community. And of course, we know that agricultural water is a big part of the picture here. We know there's a lot being done. But I think that the public and people don't always understand some of the challenges that we're facing trying to get farmers to the table, or just what that landscape looks like. If you could shed some light on that for us.
Sure. Thank you, Chandler. Yeah, I'm one of those farm kids that grew up with a shovel in my hand. My father was a proof engineer, so I said I was a proof engineer's intern for a number of years, so in water rights. But the interesting thing about farmers, they're in a tough business. It's often not regarded, I think, as a business, but they're in a business where they have to work on taking care of land, working with nature to grow food, to feed their own family and lots of other families, and to try to anticipate in advance what nature's going to throw at you next year, what the markets are going to do, and so on. They have a tough job. One of the things that farmers are good at, though, is looking ahead, because they have to do that. When you manage natural systems, You have to anticipate what the system's going to do and think ahead. And farmers do that. It's no mystery that the Great Salt Lake is declining in size and volume. Farmers have been on board with this. Since Judy tells me, quote, I'm doing a damn poor job of being retired, but I have, in the 6 years since I retired, I've been a water policy advisor for Farm Bureau, and one of the things we've done is get farmers together 2 or 3 times a year in what we call Water Academy and just talk about water issues. That's good boots on the ground information. It's really helpful stuff. And one thing it's done is help farmers anticipate and realize how important it is to be involved. When we say we're all in this together, we're not joking. The Great Salt Lake, it's speaking to us. We're trying to listen. I hope we'll listen to each other so that we can share expertise. And one of those key expertise is our farm community. So Steve's presentation just before this, Steve, outstanding. I like your talk about water companies, because about 90%, somewhere 80–90% of the water in the Great Salt Lake Basin that's used for agricultural irrigation, used in food production, is managed through mutual water companies. Interesting. So this community cooperative spirit is alive and well in some of these companies for 177 years. Now, for 177 years, their job has been get the water, get it to the farms. Now we're asking them to do something different. And I liken this to what we're asking them to do, these companies to do that is different. They've gotten along on shoestring budgets. You'd be amazed at how much, and largely volunteer work. So now we're asking them to take on this new perspective and look at how your water affects all water in the basin and the Great Salt Lake. Well, that's out of the reach of someone who's wondering, what are my prices going to be? How much is fertilizer going to cost? And why on earth am I paying twice for diesel what I paid last year? It's tough to have the extra bandwidth. So we have to work together. We have to communicate together. We have to cooperate. So one of the metaphors that I've used in describing this, how do we help farmers help the lake? Well, if they can do a better job with their water and make that water available, and we set up Senate Bill 277, the Water Optimization Program, where the state would pay farmers half the cost of their system improvements, but they have to cover the other half. And you think, well, that's a high threshold, but it's working. We've got a lot of farmers involved in these optimization projects that Hannah and Commissioner's Office and the Great Salt Lake Water Enhancement Trust are doing a great job working with. But now let's go back to those irrigation companies. So for 100 and some years, they've done business as usual. And now we're looking at them and saying, let's make you change. Well, why change? What we're doing works. Well, because you need to look at the bigger picture. Okay, help me. So we need to look at the laws. Steve's mentioned this, I think all of us will. Some counties say that in the time that Jody and Steve and I have been working on the Water Task Force and such, we've worked on over 200 water bills over the years. So we're adapting water law to meet the situations, and this means irrigation companies now have to catch up with that, and the farmers that are members have to catch up with that. At the end of the day, we want it to get down to a system like we have in the DMAD companies in the Delta area. If you want to transfer your water over to a different place, you go into the water company office and you fill in this card. I'm sending this much of my water to this use. Now, does that just happen because they fill out the card? No. This is like the light switch on the wall. You're giving the power to the farmer to turn on the light switch. But somebody's got to set up generation, transmission, and so on, everything behind that. And so the thing Steve mentioned that's taking a while is to get these water companies, their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, their agreements among the shareholders and so on, updated and ready to do this extra layer of work, and then integrate that with the Commissioner's Office, with the Water Enhancement Trust, and with the Division of Water Rights. And we've had really good working arrangements, but we're still learning. This lake is still teaching us, and we're learning how to help farmers help the lake. So that's where we are.
Sounds complicated, thank you. All right, Jody, Yeah, it turns out that Utah does not, in fact, own the Bear River, the largest tributary to the Great Salt Lake, and you have been deeply involved, like you said, in the intricacies and politics of the Bear River for quite a while. Help us understand some of this complexity as relates to our dealings with Idaho, Wyoming, Rocky Mountain Power, and their orientations to Great Salt Lake, or not.
Thanks. Thanks, Chandler. Your comment brings up a really important point, and that is that, and it's also the same point that Steve brought up in his prepared remarks earlier. We all see the world through our own experience and through our own eyes. And with the enormity of the problems that we are facing with a declining Great Salt Lake, it's completely natural for those of us in Utah and those of us here in this room to take a real ownership interest in trying to restore the lake. And the greatest impacts, of course, to the declining lake are in Utah, and especially along the Wasatch Front. But here's the deal. We cannot get real egocentric about it. Great Salt Lake may be the center of our universe, or some of our universes, but we cannot expect those we share the river with and have different experiences and different desires and different laws to always make the Great Salt Lake the center of their universe. So that said, you know, the Bear River Commission, like all interstate commissions, has two jobs. The first is to support the compact, which apportioned or divided the water among the three states, like the Colorado River Compact did. And the second is to promote comity among the states on the river. So I can tell you that all of our Bear River commissioners from all three states have had presentations on the importance of Great Salt Lake. And at every meeting in our management committees, we get updates from Commissioner Wilhelmsen, who is the Utah Bear River Commissioner, on the status of Great Salt Lake and recovery and what's going on. So all of our commissioners really understand this, and they place a high value on comity. They look at the Colorado River and they see what happens when states can't work together, and they really understand the value of comity. So I think that we just have to remember to approach it through other people's eyes. Do you want me to go on and talk about Pacific Corp or come back later?
Yeah, that's good.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So, why not? Okay.
You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. I'm on a roll. So the other thing to remember here about the Bear River Commission and the Bear River Compact is that when it was first negotiated, and then even when it was amended in 1980, it provides that the Bear River, which starts up in the Uintas in Utah, flows down, but it ends at Great Salt Lake. Great Salt Lake was never considered a part of the Bear River. The Bear River ends. And that was also an unfortunate artifact of the times when people thought that any water which entered the Great Salt Lake was wasted. Very unfortunate and very incorrect premise. So that's what the compact was based on. Compacts are also based on depletion. In other words, how much water each signatory state can develop. And each state has already developed water. We have 3 divisions under the Bear River Compact: the upper division up high, Utah and Wyoming, central division, Wyoming and Idaho, and the lower division, which we like to think of as, oh, that's the Bear River, from Great Salt Lake down to, from Bear Lake down to Great Salt Lake. And that's what we think of as the Bear River. But there's 2 whole divisions above Bear Lake, and they have their own water rights and their own problems. So when the Bear River Commission and the states actually negotiated the compact, they said, well, there are times when there will be extra water. And so they divided or apportioned that water. Idaho has the first right to develop water amounting to annual depletion of 125,000 acre feet. Utah has then the second right to develop the next 275,000. Then Utah, Idaho split another 75,000 on equal basis, and then it's 70, 30, 30 to Idaho, 70 to Utah. Well, I don't think we'd ever get that far, even if we really all wanted to develop Bear River water. But another thing that is unique here, and that we have to remember when dealing with our neighbors on the river, is that not very many compacts say first right and second right. Colorado River Compact allocates water and apportions it to the states, but it doesn't say, California, you have the first right. Arizona, you have the last right. I mean, these things have developed over time through case law. But the Bear River Compact does say that, so we have to keep that in mind so that we're not egocentric about Bear River. Then you have Pacific Corp. Pacific Corp's really important on the Bear River because it appropriated and had decreed in Utah and Idaho 5,500 second feet of water diverted out of the Bear River to store in Bear Lake. Now, that's all the water that flows in the Bear River. In fact, maybe only one time in recorded history did the Bear River diversion into Bear Lake reach 5,500 second feet. And Pacific Corp has the right then to store that water, which could amount in the best case scenario to 1.4 million acre feet in the top 21.65 feet of Bear Lake. So that Pacific Corp uses that water to supply irrigation contracts to 151,000 acres of land in Utah and Idaho. And it runs, of course, through the power plants all the way as it goes down the river. And then occasionally it is used for flood control. So these are the institutional players on the Bear River, and they all have an important place in the compact. And we depend then on Warren's people who have the irrigation contracts to use some of the laws and programs that have been developed by our legislature to help move some of this water, this contracted water that they get out of Bear Lake, on down and put it in Great Salt Lake.
Thank you. Okay, Steve. No, that was great. We need that context. Steve, so many good threads to pull from your presentation and from your paper. Thank you for laying all of that out. One thing I want to talk about, and Jody kind of touched on this, is this idea of trade-offs. Blake Bingham said it to me once a few years ago. There are no solutions when it comes to Great Salt Lake, only trade-offs. You talked about, this idea of draining our reservoirs to fill Great Salt Lake, and then it potentially evaporates, and there goes our drinking water. And I'm just curious, how do we have these conversations about trade-offs? Ultimately, this comes down to values, which is very different than science, and even, I guess politics is also values. But how do we have these conversations about trade-offs, and are they being had, or how could they be had?
That's an impossible question. A really good one, but there are trade-offs everywhere, because anytime you make a use of water, there is an impact to somebody else. And so those impacts have to be weighed and make reasonable decisions based on how those impacts are going to be addressed. How do we mitigate them? How do we work around them? Just one thing came to mind when Jody was talking was the Bear Lake settlement. Many of you don't know, but the Bear River was not naturally tributary to Bear Lake. Pacific Corp brought that water into the lake as a reservoir. But all these irrigation companies now contract for that water, and they all depend on it and expect it to be released. But in the meantime, we've had a whole recreational industry and housing industry develop around the shores of Bear Lake. And during one drought year, the lake got pulled down a very substantial way where people were having to walk hundreds of yards from their condos to actually get to water. Someone brought an environmental lawsuit, or at least threatened to, over an endangered fish in the lake. And it looked like the whole world was going to come unglued. Instead of that, those of us involved, and I represented Bear River Canal Company, and Jody working with the power company and many others in the irrigation systems, we said, this is crazy. We're smarter than that. And got together individually as groups, and we made an agreement. And Pacific Corp says, fine, this is our projected inflow this year. And so you're only going to have X% of the water you've normally had. And then they sit there and decide how they're going to divide that up, how much will go to the irrigators, how much will be left for recreation and fishery, what kind of reserves do we want to have. That was all done by agreement in a very, very civil way. No litigation, no legislation, no real confrontation. The parties all recognize that we're in this together, and this is how we solve it. And I think that's a great example of how we do things where these trade-offs are there, is we all have to recognize that we're in this together. We're none of us dealing with this in isolation. And so the impacts from my use of water impact what happens to my neighbor. And so, yes, I'm now being forced to measure my water on my ranch. For years, I've never done that. We've just turned the water loose. We were the highest irrigator on the Provo River system. The water would keep the ground wet, but it would go back in the river and support the Heber Valley down the road later on. We've never worried about how much we diverted. That's changed, and it's changed because it's had to. And we've installed very expensive weirs and measuring devices on all of our major diversions because we recognize that we're not the only one in this game. There are other people involved. It's now a state law that we've got to do that, and Teresa's office is enforcing it pretty well. But I think the commonality we have as a society works very well for us. Utah is maybe better equipped that way than almost any other state because of our historic upbringings and the common approach we've had to community-wide things. Most of our irrigation companies were founded by early settlers and run by the church, and people just worked in a community-type setting towards the greater good. And that, I think, is going to help guide us down the road. Yeah, there'll be trade-offs, and hopefully we can find ways through it. The Bear Lake example is one way to do that avoids litigation, lots of confrontation, to get the players at the table and talk through things.
Thank you. Okay, well, we are really blowing through time, so hopefully just a couple more here. And this is whoever wants to take it. We're talking about $1 billion potentially from the federal government, and I would love to know how you guys would like to see that spent. Anyone can go.
Well, so you all saw President Trump tweet it out and then talked about $1 billion for Great Salt Lake, right? We like to call it the big, beautiful billion. Now, this is a lot like, the meeting I was literally just in before this was working work with our congressional delegation to try to make this a reality. Because believe it or not, just because President Trump tweets something doesn't make it real. So now it's time to make it real. So we're working on making it real. We appreciate his support more than you can. I mean, the fact that he elevated it to this level of national attention is absolutely incredible. Like, guys, it's unbelievable, okay? And an amazing thing. And so I kind of, joke about it, but truly we're so grateful for that he did this and raised this awareness. When that happened, my phone was getting blown up by folks in D.C., folks across the country, like, why is President Trump talking about this? What put it on his radar, right? And it's because, again, going back, when Governor Cox, he was back for some National Governors Association meetings, he got a call, hey, the president wants to meet with you. What is Utah's top issue, right? He could have gone and talked about housing. He could have gone and talked about, I don't know, whatever, right? All sorts of stuff. The economy, affordability. What did he talk about? The Great Salt Lake, right? So for anyone who doubts this commitment from this administration, from the state of Utah, just know, actions they matter. Speak louder than words. This is action. So, to your question, Chandler, how do we get it? What are we going to spend it on? There's a whole list of things. Trust me, there's more than $1 billion of need out there. But there's 4 basic categories. I talked about this the other day with the media, but it's engineered solutions. It's doing things to help us improve deliveries to the lake. You wouldn't believe how much water gets held up, evaporated off, consumed by invasive species, other things, because our delivery systems mechanisms are so degraded. They're built back in, they're decades past their lifespan. And so it's those kind of things. It's things like reconnecting some portions of the West Desert that have been segregated out because of those pumps, right? The pumps that are in the way. They had to actually build some dikes out in the West Desert. But there's actually some significant water that could flow back to the lake if we just open some of those systems back up. There's water leasing. That was a top priority, and acquisition, right? Being able to lease water from farmers, as Warren talked about, in a willing manner and in the right way. There's way more demand right now than funding available for us to pay farmers to deliver water to the lake. They want to participate. It is invasive species removal. I mean, I can't tell you how much I hate Phragmites. It's the worst. And it is so aggressive, and then we have to keep on top of it, and it's so expensive to treat and to manage. So it's all those kind of things, right? But ultimately, what the main purpose of that funding is to get water to the Great Salt Lake. That's what we need, and that's what we're working on. I'm going to keep it short. So that's it.
What about some capacity for the state engineer's office, who hasn't had funding since the 90s? Can we get Teresa some staff?
Well, Teresa, I'm happy to give you one-time money, because that's what this billion is. But that staff.
1 FTE, 2 FTEs, come on.
No, for 1 year. Anyway, if you want to respond to that.
I was just going to say, I'm sure that part of this plan would be enhanced measurement as well, and those are key. And even one-time funding helps us. Yep, exactly.
Anyone else?
Well, we just,
I want to hear people's ideas, quite frankly.
yeah, we want you to put your money where her mouth is.
So I'll just say this, guys, this is not like, we have brilliant people that are working at the Department of Natural Resources. The Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office is leading out on this, just so you know, with all of our agencies are. All of our agencies are engaged and involved. But ultimately, we don't assume that we have all the answers. We need partners. We actually have incredible partners. I see representatives from Duck Unlimited and Audubon and other NGO organizations here, right? Critical. People on the ground, I see it personally, they know how best to solve this. Work with us, help us, and let's work on this together. But we want to hear those it doesn't have to be today, but I want to hear, what are your ideas? What do you think, right? So that we can work on this together. Because it is going to, this is not just a one and done, this $1 billion at one shot, it helps, doesn't finish, right? We're in this for the long haul. It's going to be years and years and years of work. So we're going to keep working on this. And it's really exciting, too.
It's great. No, thank you for your work. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Steve, you brought up the Colorado River. Obviously, that is a terrible crisis as well. How much does that factor into our Great Salt Lake planning and efforts? Anyone can answer.
Not a lot, in the sense that they're very different water systems. Colorado River is governed by a 7-state compact, which locks us into a very different posture. But a lot of the Utah-Colorado River water is being diverted and imported into this basin for drinking water supply. And so if we lose the Colorado River water, it will have drastic impacts on our overall water supply available for domestic use in our municipalities. The same will be true with the Provo River project that imports water off the Duchesne River and to some extent the Weber River. That throws an awful lot of burden on the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, is the only one that doesn't get foreign water, and to try and contribute. But it will have an impact if our allocation during these drought conditions is dramatically reduced. That's going to affect what central Utah has available to import to the drainage, and that in turn will have an impact on our water supplies. Urban conservation becomes even more critical at that point.
And it would put much more pressure on finding some solutions on the Bear River to get more Bear River water down to the lake as well, from everywhere.
I want to talk about coordination. We hear that word a lot. I loved the beehive that Anna showed earlier. I mean, it really is amazing to think about all of the groups that are now working together in ways that they were not previously on Great Salt Lake. There are a lot of new groups, the group I work for, Great Salt Lake Rising included, that want to be in the coordination space, and so it's almost like now we have to figure out how to coordinate the coordinators. But I would love to hear, what do you think about where we are on coordination? I know, Warren, this is something you talk about a lot. Are we moving in the right direction? Are we creating more messes? How does that look from your perspective?
Did you just call me out? Okay.
We've seen your slides.
All right, yeah. So my slides, we didn't get to use them today, but it starts real simple. You have two people, Teresa and I. How many paths of communication between us? One from me to her, one from her to me. You put three people in this loop, include Joel, he's complicated. Yeah, you bring Joel in, how many communication paths? It's 12, because you have to take group dynamics into account. Now, every time we add a new group that's working on Great Salt Lake issues, you exponentially increase the communication paths, the communication cost, and the resources it takes to do that. So coordination, when you have a problem as big as Great Salt Lake, there's not one organization or one person that can solve that. We've all got to work together. And the temptation, I even brought in a beautiful slide of some brand new agricultural silos down in the Delta area. And there were big silos and little silos and so on. We're in danger of doing that if we don't work together. And if we work in silos, we won't get there. And so looking out across this group today, this is a really healthy sign, isn't it? But we have to keep that in mind all the time. Don't create something new until you see what's on the ground and if it's working. And I'm going to go back, Steve, and underline again the Ag Water Optimization Program has got all these moving parts to fit together, but they're coming together. Yeah. And so we're going to be better off. Now let me go one more step.
Oh,
okay?
please.
The one more step is I was involved in a very peculiar way with the West Desert pumps. Yeah. You think, wow, what does that got to do with Great? Yeah, well, it's all about Great Salt Lake. The strange thing is my old law partner was getting daily calls from Governor Bangerter as he's trying to make decisions on whether to put the pumps out there or not. So there are a lot of people involved in that. But just by accident, one night I was working with AI and ask it to bring up some information preparing for this meeting. And it popped up and said, would you like me to compare the West Desert Pumping Station decision-making process to the current processes? Well, yeah. And one thing that we've got to keep in mind here is this isn't the only time this state's going to be going through this. So the speakers have alluded to that today, and it's really worth noting. We could go back to, and I've got the printout here of how does this compare to the decision-making process back in 1985 through 1987, or 83 actually, through 87. How did that work out? So we're setting, if we set patterns here of how to learn from the lake and share that learning among us, which is going to take a lot of communication, we'll be better off the next time this comes around, because we know that the lake partially runs on the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So every 10 to 15 years, you're seeing these cycles. And there's a prediction that next year we're going to have the strongest El Nino ever. And I want Joel Ferry to personally guarantee that's going to mean water to our lake. So,
I'm doing everything I can to make that happen, let me tell you.
Agent Ferry, yeah.
but this coordination is the key to success now and in the long term.
Okay, well, one rapid fire question to wrap up before we open it up to the audience. It's cool to be the governor because you can say stuff like, we're going to do it by 2034, and then you're out of office in 2034, so you're not on the hook. No, I do appreciate his commitment, trust me. And I think it's amazing what our leadership has done, like Commissioner Ferry said. But I am more interested just in what you all think is like our best next step. What do we need to do next? What's the next missing piece? What would you like to see? Keep it short, please. Whoever wants to go first.
Keep working on ag water optimization. It's our biggest opportunity, short of getting rid of Phragmites and hoping for a really good El Nino.
Maybe I'll go. I think for me, as the engineer up here, I see so many solutions in the engineering possibilities and the water rate system that I think we just need to collaborate. But also for us, it's going to be our challenge to make sure that all of you and everyone else understands that data so that we can make some good decisions.
Yeah, thank you. And to the panelists, thank you. These guys are the best. I'm up here as like...
I wish we had 3 hours. You guys are all celebrities to me.
Well, I was going to say I'm with the water buffaloes here, but I didn't want to, I mean, it's amazing. And to just be in the presence of some incredible minds that have driven and guided state water policy law and outcome for the past decades, right, is really incredible for me personally. But I'll just say this. I think when I look at this, the kind of the broad horizon, we do need to set big goals. We need to be ambitious. We need to be making bold moves. And so the governor's goal of a healthy lake by 2034 is just that. It is a broad goal. So how do we make that goal a reality? Okay. Today we have done, and Steve mentioned this and others have mentioned this as well. Jody has, Warren has, Teresa has. But we have changed state law and policy. We now have the most progressive water policy in the country. We can do more. We've introduced flexibility into our system. Water law inherently is designed to be rigid so that you have certainty, so that you have direction going forward, right? And when you start to introduce flexibility, all of a sudden there's variables that you introduce into that equation. We now have flexibility in our system. Farmers can lease their water to a sovereign body like Great Salt Lake. We can do an in-stream flow for an environmental purpose, and it receives beneficial use. So it's not this argument of use it or lose it is now gone, right? We now have funding mechanisms. We have a demand management program. We just ran legislation to speed up the process and help streamline the process for ag water leases to be done so much quicker and so much easier now. All of this is designed to accomplish this end goal. But what do we need? We still need money. We need funding to make these things a reality. Now, we talked about the $1 billion from President Trump and from the federal government. That's huge, right? I want to give a shout out to the families we saw just a few weeks ago. We did an announcement with the Magalets, that's Maverick, with the Marriotts, with the Millers, right? $10 million each. That is absolutely incredible. But we need more of that because all of this, there's one common thread in all of this, right? Water flows to money, right? We need the money to make these things a reality. These engineered solutions, don't just happen because we wish that they'll happen. It takes an investment. The state's made big investments in a lot of different areas. We need that investment to continue, but we need the private side, we need the NGO side, we need the federal side. All of us coming together, and we can all make a difference. And I'll just say one last thing. The other thing that's really keeping me up at night is this drought. And I know that there's been some discussions about drought. It hasn't really been brought up in this panel. But guys, this drought is horrendous. And it is really deep. It is really bad. We have seen peak inflows, peak stream flows. We are going to be seeing record low flows. We are going to be seeing areas that have had water not have water. It's really bad. And so all of us across the state have got to do our part to use less. Think about your lawn when it goes brown. It's not brown, it's golden. Right?
Gorgeous.
Let's turn these things into positives. And we can get through this together. But we're done. I think we're done. So I'm going to be done. But guys, there's a lot of things. We need money. We need to focus. We need to conserve. We got so much we got to do. But yes, I'm done.
Thank you for being a part of it all. No, you really are a hero. Jody, what would you like to see?
I'm going to go real low tech. We've heard all of these great programs. We've heard about money. We have heard about measurements. I'm going to go really low tech. What I think we've got to do, and what I think we need to do on the Bear River, and what we need to do throughout, is conservation. We got to conserve. And it's not big, it's not sexy, it's not, although golden lawns.
Make it sexy.
I'm going to go with golden lawns. I love golden lawns. But we have dedicated water change applications. We got to use them. They can be used on the Bear River. We have discussions going on with joint management plans on the Bear River, and I'm just talking about Bear River stuff here, but and we've got to back up those negotiations with concrete actions, develop some efficiencies, work with Pacific Corp. I think Pacific Corp is willing to work to be more efficient in the water management on the river and at the lake. And we haven't got any magic bullets here, so let's conserve. We've got the tools. The legislature has given us the tools. The trust has some money to help. Let's conserve.
Let's do it. Thank you. Steve?
Well, it's a tough act to follow all this. One area where I think we need to do more is focusing on cloud seeding and impacting that, because it doesn't matter how much money we have. If there's no snow, there's no water to distribute to the lake, there's no water to lease to send to the lake. And we've got to try and do something to help shift this climate. We can't do it on our own, obviously. It's a big, much bigger issue. But I think we need to take more steps that way and try and develop the science necessary, and maybe even take up Dr. Perry's stand and do some capping out of some of the playas out in the lake and keep the dust down so that people like me don't suffer respiratory problems from it. Water is real important to all of that, but these other things are the consequences of lack of water. And I think we've got to take those into account as we go forward.
Thank you. Okay, we've got some time for some audience questions if anyone has any. Got a mic up there.
Thank you, everybody. This is fantastic. I actually have two things. The first one, though, relates to the money question. And is there, you talked about coordination. Is there a coordinated effort, or is there a entity that is working on philanthropy for the lake? One of you said there is so much money in this state between individual wealthy people, corporations, and others. And I know we've had some, Miller and so forth.
But that seems like there's a lot of potential there. And those are presumably people who are invested here, whether that's as their favorite vacation destination or skiing or what have you. So I'm just curious if there's a coordinated element there.
I can answer that very quickly. My organization, Great Salt Lake Rising, is really focused on exactly that. How can we channel private sector funding into this effort?
Fantastic, thanks. My second thing is trying to connect some pieces. Steve, Clyde was talking about climate, and that obviously is the giant thing that is connected to everything, water and energy nexus. I just want to say to the audience in the room, if any of you are in communities that are part of the Utah Renewable Communities effort, municipalities are voting on that. I'm from Ogden. We just passed it at literally 11:55 p.m. last night, so Ogden's in. Which is great, right? I mean, it's fantastic. Salt Lake's in. I know there are 6 communities now that are in. So if anyone has any ties to those other communities, that's a huge chunk. That's like 20 to 25% of our electricity generation in Utah, so, or along the Wasatch Front anyway. So climate action.
So another money question. During my professional career, I worked in water quality and listened to lots of wastewater treatment plant operators say things like, well, if we have to spend more money to treat water to higher standards, it takes the cost up to the point where we need to sell that water to recover that cost. And that's like what keeps me up at night, actually. And so the question I've got is, like, what's the kind of relative contribution of all of the wastewater treatment plants to the lake, you know, and to like the rivers too, because for example, the Jordan River, that water makes up a big part of the Jordan River in the summer. So, like, looking ahead as water gets more scarce and there's more people and more pressure on those wastewater treatment plants to recover those costs. What's the plan? Is there can we put eminent domain on that water and say, hey, the taxpayers paid to treat that water, and so it's our water and you can't resell it? Or how do we keep that water in the lake? That's a question. That's my question.
That's a really complicated question. And the reason is under our state law, the parties who are contributing that water into the wastewater treatment system own the effluent. And so it's not the treatment facility's water to sell, but it may be the entity who has contributed X percent of the water being treated there. It's their water to deal with. And so that complicates life a bit, but it's the way it is right now. But using treated wastewater, reusing wastewater for domestic systems, for domestic irrigation or something, that's always had some appeal, but it has a corresponding effect of reducing the volume of water getting to the lake. The other impact of that is if we do that, it takes less, reduces the stress, if you will, on development of new water supplies for municipalities to grow, and lets that other water maybe stay available for some of these in-stream flow leases and some of the other things. So it's something I think we need to focus on, but there are clearly trade-offs each way you deal with it. The Central Utah Project, of course, contributes a lot of water to all of our municipalities, and so a portion of the wastewater treatment in the Central Valley, South Valley, and all those treatment facilities belongs to the district. We have contractual obligations and NEPA obligations to reuse some of that water. So it is starting to happen, and financial penalties are imposed if we don't do that. And if we do that, or if we have to pay the penalties, the money is plowed back in to developing water, not into just paying fines. So, but yeah, there are some built-in incentives in our laws, but it's problematic in the sense that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction in water. And what are the trade-offs? How do you measure those qualitatively and make a reasoned decision? That's the tough part.
So I'm not a water lawyer, and so I feel like a little bit of or a politician, but I don't hear a whole lot of mention of in-stream flows in the conversation on Great Salt Lake. I feel like there's a whole lot of focus on getting water to the lake, obviously through flows in streams and rivers. However, the kind of more of a statewide, in-stream flow type of legal framework like you see in other states hasn't caught on as much here in Utah. I know there have been laws on the books for a number of years for like kind of specific areas, but just kind of stepping back and thinking more holistically about rivers and streams having water in them and that just being inherently beneficial for the watershed and the lake. How are you all thinking about that? And is that just something we don't mention because it's too far out in the future? Where do you all land on in-stream flow?
And so I'll just jump in really quick. So there has been, as we've talked about, a lot of changes to in-stream flow. There are some in-stream flow that is happening, but they're within existing water rights in some cases, like June sucker recovery and some of the obligations that Central Utah has through like the Provo River, just as an example. But as we move that water through, it is helping those systems as that water is dedicated, but we're also finally able to quantify it under those change applications so that we know it needs to stay and not just get taken by that next downstream user. So I think there's a lot of hidden, maybe what's not as visible to the public, but it is happening.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that any, like, these agricultural leases, these dedication of a water right that then gets transferred down to the lake, it is using in-stream flow to get there, right? So we may say it's a water lease to the lake. We're actually, that is in-stream. That is an in-stream flow, right? The purpose, the benefit is water in the river, but the purpose was point A to point B in the river is that connection that the state engineer's office is managing, is regulating and shepherding to get that water through. We have those tools in place. We may just refer to it as a little bit different than some other state. So it's not just for like a fish flow. It is benefiting the fish, but that's a purpose, but it's the end goal is that water to that water body at the end of the line. So we're doing it.
Can I ask a follow-up? Just like, do you envision a future where the water in the rivers is the goal? I know that water to the lake is really the first priority right now and that it's happening. It is in the rivers because of that, but do you see a future where that could be a goal?
I'd like to see us at some point get where Oregon is, for example. They've got a really good in-stream flow system in place, but they require that the water that is being saved through that process, at least 25% of that be dedicated to the stream perpetually. And then the party who has made the water available has the latitude to market the rest of it. So, yeah, there are options out there, things we could look at, and other examples in states that are working well. Of course, a lot of those states have got tremendously more water than we do, and that complicates life in Utah. We are very dry, as you know. But there are examples of where other states have done that, have created an economic incentive to make it work, and I think we can get there.
Thank you for all the state is doing. I'm just would like maybe Commissioner Ferry to address a little bit. It seems like at times the state's working against itself. We see great efforts in trying to protect the Great Salt Lake, and then on the other hand, we see some big efforts like through inland ports and like giant projects.
You can say data center.
Data center projects where it seems like the state is just absolutely kind of working.
I don't know what you're talking about. What?
Anyway, yeah, I'm just concerned about
like the conflict, right?
The conflict there that we're trying to save the Great Salt Lake.
Are we being duplicitous?
On the other hand, the inland ports, we're reducing all the regulation, and through MIDA, we're trying to do things on a fast track so that we're not really evaluating the full impacts of what is going to happen to the Great Salt Lake. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a concern on a lot of people's minds right now as well. And so ultimately, I can tell you that these, from the state's perspective, okay, that these applications that are made to a change in land use or a utilization of a resource, such as a change in a water right, a water right application, a change application. The state engineer's office is not treating those any different, like speeding them up or slowing them down. They are part of a process, and they will follow that process. It's the same with DEQ. I can tell you right now, they will do the studies, they will do the analysis to make sure that they make the right decision. And so nothing is predetermined, nothing is prejudice. It is going through the process in a very independent look, just like any other application would go. The challenge you get into is there's a lot of crossover because there's a lot of discussion about, well, you know, most recently this big data center up in like literally just across the valley from where I grew up, right? And yeah, I'm concerned, but also I recognize private property rights, and I recognize that there's, you know, there's growth that happens. It's just, you know, you have Thiokol, the old Thiokol. My grandpa worked at Thiokol, right? I wouldn't, like my mom's dad, like my family would, I wouldn't be here without him moving to Brigham City, getting a job, and my dad marrying, or my mom marrying a farm boy from out in West Corinne, right? It'd be a different outcome for me and my family. And so you have to recognize that these things happen. But ultimately, my purpose, my perspective is I want to make sure if these are going to happen that there's consideration given, so it's not just mass development. One of the things, like the inland port, one of the things I stepped in and said, hey, inland port, I got concerns. So most of you don't, maybe you don't know or you do, but say like the Weber Inland Port, because it does have an impact, it's out in some sensitive areas. Not all of it is, but some of it is in sensitive area. There's a dedication of 3% of the tax increment back into wetland conservation, preservation, and enhancement, right? A commitment from them, they won't develop on any lands that have wetland characteristics, right? So it took thousands of acres off the table. Even though it's still in the project area, it won't be developed, it'll be protected. We created buffers because we have state WMAs across the fence line. So we now have, don't quote me on this, but I think it's a 600-foot buffer between their property and the state WMA that will not be developed, right? It's those kind of things. And if we don't step in and take action, then yeah, they have the right to develop up to their fence line, right? To do some of these kind of things, because that's what private property is about. And so I try to strike a balance. I recognize there's impacts. You know, yeah, I want to see the outcome happen in the right way, but there's two sides to the coin, and so we have to try to strike the right balance on some of these issues. It's very difficult, but just know from my perspective, our office, the Department of Natural Resources, we're trying to strike the right balance to make sure we're doing things the right way. So thank you for that
I think
question.
it comes back to that point about like how do we have conversations about values and trade-offs. So ongoing. We have to wrap it up. I'm sorry. We are bleeding into lunchtime. But thank you guys so much. Seriously, you are heroes, have been doing so much for the lake, for water, for our state. So please give it up for our panel.
Thanks, everyone. Lunch is served in the Granite Ballroom across the walkway, and our session will resume at 1:30.
Way too. I'm like, oh wow, one question each of you. Yeah.